Sure.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen. Oh, Kadoshim. So
No,
much.
I wish.
Oh, we're not doing? Oh, okay.
Well, we still haven't read Acharei Mot, have we?
Oh, I thought we
On
just
Shabbos.
did. Oh, maybe
I would love to start Kadoshim, and maybe
I thought I wrote notes on Acharei Mot.
we did. We did it last week, but remember,
it's still Acharei Mot. Oh,
we are still. Your reaction is exactly right on.
Darn.
I was going to say, it is so challenging. It is like this is one of the most countercultural parshiot in the Torah, and especially out here in the Bay Area, it really is very challenging, and it deals with topics that become very personal, and I think we all have to struggle with these sorts of things, and I think that's the right place to be. Is you try to figure it out. It's not simple, but I believe we're going to be continuing now with the subject that we started last time, which had to do with shchutei chutz, that is, offerings that were offered up outside of the temple precinct, which are quite honestly as quite severely forbidden, and we're going to keep going with this. So here we go. The ish and every man mi Beit Yisrael, from the household of Israel, umin hager hagar betocham, and from, literally it means the stranger who resides amongst them. In other words, sometimes this is described as a resident alien, but essentially it means, and of course the term ger, please excuse me for a moment, is used to describe someone who converts to Judaism. And that's essentially what this means. It means someone who is not born Jewish, but who chooses to adopt Jewish practices, right? Asher yochal kol dam. So now we're getting on to the consumption of blood, of any blood, of an animal. V'natati fanai b'nefesh ha'ochelet et adam. Says, literally it means I shall place my face against the soul of one who consumes the blood. V'hichrati ota b'kerev ama, and I will cut that soul off. Ota means it, and nefesh is feminine, from the midst of its people. So again, the severity of this punishment is what sort of informs you regarding the severity of this whole issue, the seriousness of this whole issue. So what challenges us now is the fact that any part of kosher meat is that one removes the blood. That blood is essentially taken, after the meat is processed, essentially it's soaked for, I believe, an hour in order to soften the meat, soften the muscle, and then it is salted because the salt removes the meat. So basically, any blood that is in that meat is essentially removed. Now, I mean, we've all had rare steaks, perhaps, etc., and we know that there's some blood in those steaks. I think I've mentioned this before, but that blood is not considered a dam nafshit. It is not considered the kind of blood that they're talking about in this passage. But the fact that we kosher meat and go to that is not just a matter of how it's slaughtered, and the way it's slaughtered is also intended to remove as much blood as possible from the animal. But the point obviously that I'm making is how many people choose not to eat kosher meat. And does this in fact mean that we are contravening this particular statement here? And of course, this is very challenging. It is very challenging. And I think, in terms of how one comes to this is, a step at a time. And our culture is fighting this. And it is something to think about. So let's take a look at the Rashi on this. Okay, so it says kol dam, right? Any blood, every blood. So it says the fishin emar banefesh, because it states a little bit later, right? It says banefesh yechaper, because it says through the nefesh, the soul, that is the soul of the animal, the life of the animal, a person is atoned for. Just to review this a second as to how this works, this is all referring back to that moment when Abraham was willing to offer Isaac up as a sacrifice. And remember, there was a ram that he found in a thicket after the angel told him by no means not to do that. And essentially, that is the dynamic that then allowed animals to take our place. But it is a way of looking at our lives and seeing our lives as totally in divine hands, that the only reason we are alive is because God has this outside, this transcendent existence, has allowed us to come into existence. And we've talked about this I think, on a number of occasions, that when we don't act properly, when we act improperly and we act in a way that would be contrary to divine will, essentially our lives become forfeit. And the way to straighten this out is that God has given us this opportunity to utilize the life of an animal to take the place of our own lives. But it is certainly a very deep, if nothing else, it is a very, very, very deep understanding of a sense of appreciation. I mean, how appreciative can one be in terms of understanding the value of a person's life? Just what an incredibly valuable thing your life is. And if one is able to understand that, I think it is a helpful value. And we're doing this together, and I'm definitely open if any of you would raise your hands through the application, that I can see if you've raised your hand. I'm happy to hear your comments, etc. This is just the beginning of a whole series of very challenging issues that come up now for many of us, especially if we're not raised with an Orthodox background. And I was not. I was raised with a traditional background, but a lot of this I had to slowly come to and try to understand. Let's just keep going. So Rashi's giving the point here, right? That the blood of the offering, right? It atones. And so he says, because that's what it says, because when it talks about blood in another context, it says Yachol lo yehe chayav. It's possible that one might infer from this that one is only guilty, right, of this particular violation, ela al dam hamuktashim, regarding blood of animals that have been dedicated to the altar. In other words, we might have said, well, because it says that the blood comes to atone, we're only talking about blood that is used to atone. Talmud lomar kol dam. That is the force of when it says any blood. So when it says kol, any blood, it comes to include those animals that are just regular animals that we consume ourselves, that are not muktashim. Yes, Golda, I see you.
Hi. I was at the grocery store last couple of days, right before Pesach.
Yes.
Right after the
Yes.
the Yom, and picking up some last minute stuff. And I was walking down the frozen food aisle, and there was a Muslim woman who was trying to find things
Yes.
for whatever, for Ramadan or whatever.
Right.
And she was telling me, we were talking about, she says, just, well, I won't do pork, and I don't do blood, and I don't do any of that stuff. And I was telling her about they're going to sell Cohen's. So that's a little uproar in St. Louis that we might not have a kosher butcher anymore. That would be bad. Or maybe they'll find somebody to run it. But
wow.
Yeah, that's a big wow. So, but he's talked about selling it before. So I don't know he might just need a good partner who would run the business. But she said she had bought like a big piece of veal there.
Hmm.
And she was just so glad that she didn't have to worry about where the blood was.
Right.
That there wasn't going to be any blood in it, even though it was extremely expensive. I says, yep, because that's what we pay for. Extremely expensive, but there's no blood in there. So we do what we have to do.
Right.
We
Right.
all do what we have to do to make this work. And it does bother me sometimes that there are people out there who don't keep kosher.
Well,
I mean, Jews who don't keep kosher, but I know it's a dance, and we used to eat meat out, but I changed. I didn't do that after I was 16. But yeah,
yes. So
it's
those,
difficult.
it is. I personally don't want to judge, so few people actually keep kosher or eat kosher meat, and I
Hmm.
simply am not. I have to, it's not for me to judge them. I have to say, a lot of these people are doing it because they don't know about this. But even if they did know about it, I don't know that it would make any difference. Uh, and it's I mean, I guess I've moved on feeling that it's up to me to try and convince them otherwise. I think people need to come to these sorts of things, if they choose to
Hmm.
study and to internalize what they're learning. It's a beautiful thing and it's a gift from God, and I tend to try to look at it more from the positive side. And I also, forgive me for mentioning a business, I don't get any missions for this, but I have to say thank God for Trader Joe's, because
Absolutely.
that's where I get my kosher meat up here, up in Santa Rosa. And frankly, from my position, I think it is reasonably priced. But again, in a way, you could say that it's testing us as to what we consider more important. Do we consider, it's one thing if you really can't afford it, but most of us, thank God, are in a position where it's just a matter of not wanting to spend the money on it. And it's not a matter that we can't
Yeah.
afford it. We just don't want to pay for it because we don't feel it's an important issue. And again, kashrut is a chok. In other words,
Hmm.
it isn't a law that's given like thou shalt not murder. It is
Hmm.
not necessarily a rational law. It is more of a law that in which we express our love for God, because we do it because he says we need to do it. God says we need to do it, we do it. And
Right.
that's a very fundamental value when it comes to expressing love for the person you claim to love. Is the fact that they asked you to do it is a good enough argument. But again, I feel, and I want to be solution oriented, that the best that we can do is just to simply set an example and
Hmm.
not try to suggest to other people that they're somehow not as good or anything like that. That
Oh,
is
no, no, no.
that.
Nothing like that. It's just
Yeah,
it is just a little irritating. It
yeah.
just is.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. I guess
I don't tell anybody that, to
no,
their faces
no,
or anything,
no.
but
We
it's like,
shouldn't.
no, that's not a thing. It's just like it's like oh, what a shame. It's like, oh, what a shame you're just not doing this because you can.
Yeah. Again, I'm not even there. I'm not even
Yeah.
there. I
But I don't
really.
even say that. It's just
Yeah.
internal.
Look, you're sharing your feelings, and
Right.
feelings are feelings, and
Yeah.
yeah. But I would say that I
I'd
try.
rather be a vegan. I'd rather be vegetarian if I couldn't eat meat, if I couldn't do
Well, let me
kosher.
tell you, there are many people who are vegetarians and vegans up in Sonoma County,
I believe that.
and maybe they feel that I'm less of a person because I'm a carnivore.
That's
Okay,
true.
so
That's true.
that's but
Everybody's got
by the way,
their shtick.
I'd be happy to take a moment here to say that that is the pernicious underbelly of being observant. It's a terrible thing. I'm saying it's a terrible thing. When you start to do these things, you understand them, you love to do them, etc., but you're looking down on other people. And I think that is
Right.
awful. The other little pernicious underbelly is showing off. You really don't want, you want to be careful not to show off. And those are two things that sometimes go along with being observant, that you really, really have to work very hard not to feel that way, and rather to feel grateful that you're in a position to be able to express your love of the divine in this particular way, and understand that people have their own personal ways
Oh, sure.
of doing this, and let it go at that. Anyway, let me finish this Rashi. But I mean, you raised some very legitimate issues.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Venatati panai, I shall set my face. And I think in English we would say, to set your face against someone means to oppose them in a very serious and severe kind of way. So there's a sweet play on words from the Torah Kohanim, from the Sifra. And you notice that here's the word panai, but here is the word pnai, right, with an aleph. This is an aleph. So it's a play on words. And he says, the Torah Kohanim says, pnai sheli. In other words, pnai means your free time, things like that. Pnai means having time that is free. And it says, my free time, right? And this is the explanation. In other words, I shall give up my free time, as it were. Porne ani mikol iskai. It says, I will turn from everything else I'm busy with. This is as if God's speaking this way. And it's, of course, purely metaphoric, right? For osek bo, and I'm going to concern myself with him. And again, what is this simply saying? It's simply saying that even though, and perhaps precisely because we would not consider it an important issue, the Torah wants us to learn that it is a great issue, right? Okay. So, and Leah, thank you for your note. I'm glad you felt it was an important point to make. Going on. Here he goes, and he explains, right? Ki nefesh habasar badam, because the soul, literally, if we're going to translate nefesh as soul, but the word nefesh often has a connotation of animal soul, meaning the thing that makes us alive, right? The thing that animates us, that element which makes so that, of course, when we lose our nefesh, then we are no longer alive. But it's talking, there are other souls that we have, right? We talk about the neshama, right? And there probably is another name that's escaping me right this moment, but the point is this: we're talking about the life of the flesh is in the blood. In other words, what animates this person is the dam, is the blood. Right? It is. That's va'ani netativ lachem, and I have given this to you. God has given this to the Jewish people. Al hamizbeach, on to place on the altar lechaper al nafshotechem, in order to atone for your lives, for your souls. Ki hadam, for the blood. Hu nefesh yechaper, because the blood can atone for the life, right? So the significance of blood. So let's take a look at the Rashi. Ki nefesh habasar, right? So because the life of the flesh, right? What animates the flesh. Ki chol bria badam hi tluya, because in every living creature, in every creature, it depends on its blood. And for this reason, Rashi's saying this, trying to sort of parallel the point that's being made here, right? And for this reason, I have placed it al hamizbeach, on the altar, the chaper al nefesh adam, in order to atone for the life of the person. And he explains basically the dynamic. Tavo nefesh, let a life come, the techaper al hanefesh, so as to atone for a life. So this is only one element, right? I mean, we've talked about this before. The greatest gift you can give anybody is yourself. That is the greatest gift you can give anybody. And so there's two ways in which one can look at this. One can look at it as saying, I recognize that in hurting you, in doing something that just goes against what you want me to do, my life has become forfeit. Or you can use it in a very different direction, just the opposite, that I value you and I appreciate you so much and I love you so much that I want to give you my life. And of course, sometimes we say, that it's a great sacrifice that people give to protect someone else. But this gets deeply into some of the dynamics of what it is to love. So yes, superficially, this is very tough stuff to deal with. But if we're willing to let it speak to us, there are some incredible messages that are there. So give me a moment here. I need to do something. Okay. And there we go. We can continue. We'll take another verse. Al kain amarti livnei Israel. And for this reason, I have said to the children of Israel, kol nefesh miken, any soul of yours, or every soul of yours. But in this case, any would probably be a better translation. Lo tochal dam, should not consume blood. V'hager, and in addition, remember the ger, the person who resides amongst you, the tochachem, amongst you, lo yochal dam, should not consume any blood. So, kol nefesh miken, any soul of yours, lahazir, so any, right? What's the force of the any? Lahazhir gdolim al haktanim. And what this is saying is that even a katan is someone who is not bar mitzvah, who is not considered to have come of age to be responsible for observing mitzvot, means it is to warn adults regarding their children, meaning that an adult is responsible to make sure that their children observe this commandment as well. So the whole point about, of course, being a minor is that you're not held responsible in the way an adult is, but when it comes to this particular mitzvah, it's one where it says, because it says kol nefesh, in other words, any soul amongst you, including minors, means that adults have to make sure that minors do not consume blood. Let's see. We'll go to one more verse. We'll see if we can do this. The ish mibnei Israel, and every man from amongst the children of Israel, or min hager betucham, and again, from the one who resides amongst them, asher yatsud tzed chaya o'of, who hunts game from wild animals or birds, asher ye'achel, which may be eaten, v'shafach etamo, you shall pour out its blood, v'chisahu ba'afar, and you should cover it up with the dust, with earth. Okay. It's interesting halacha, right? And the fact that it deals with wild animals. And because we know that, for example, deer, right? Because deers have split hoof, split hoof, and they chew the cud, they are kosher animals, right? And then we've already defined what birds are in fact kosher, right? So, ainli elatzai, which are hunted. In other words, as opposed to domesticated here. Ainli ela tzayid. So it says, if this is the case, we're only referring to game. Avazim, geese, the tarnagolim, and chickens, Minayin. How do we know that we are also referring to geese and chickens? Here we go, which were caught before and now raised domestically. In other words, they aren't technically game, but how do we know this? And it says Talmud Lomar. So it says Yatsud Sayid, right? It could have said Asher Yatsud Chaya, who hunts, game and or birds, of animals and wild animals or birds. But the fact that it has Said, this word Said, it says in any case, Mikol Makom. In other words, even if you have caught these, you are now raising these birds domestically, this halacha still applies. Imkain, so he says, if that's the case, Lama Ne'emar Asher Yatsud. So in that case, why does it say that which is hunted? Shelo yochal basar, that the point of that is to say that this kind of meat should not be consumed, ella bahazmana zot, except with this kind of preparation. So we know for a fact that birds are not kosher unless they're domesticated. They have to be raised in order to be domesticated. And then I believe this particular halacha called kisui hadam, the covering of the blood, is in fact part of the procedure in terms of selling kosher kosher fowl. Asher ye'achel, which may be eaten. He says the point of it, asher ye'achel, is to tell you prat latmeim, that is to exclude birds that are tameh, that are impure birds. Well, we're not allowed to eat impure birds, period. So there's no way to prepare an impure bird and still have it consumed. But even here, as we go in over time, right? Let me say this, that when you look at the kind of preparation that is required to make sure that this meat is kosher and that we can consume it, you could say that part of all of that is a way of showing deep respect for the fact that you're taking a life of an animal and in order to consume it, that these kinds of practices are a way to emphasize the seriousness that is involved in taking the life of an animal in order to consume it. And we'll stop here and for today. And I'm going to stop the recording end.